Well, Keith, welcome. I'm super
Yes.
excited to get to chat with you. For those of you who don't know, this is Keith Schneider. Um, and gosh, I'm trying to think how many years ago we showed your work. Four, five? It's
Something like that.
embarrassing.
Yeah. four
It's
or
been a
five
while.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool that because I don't even think we got to talk on the phone back then, let
Mhm.
alone do a video chat. So
It's all email.
it's nice to get more acquainted. Um, So for the audience, yeah, so we've got Keith's work up online right now as our online exclusive these next couple weeks. And, for years now, Keith has been making this phenomenal work. There was a gentleman that called it out as whimsical, and I hesitate to use that word because I think it's all your work is, um, there's like a depth to it. And in email, we kind of talked about like the characters, like the nuances of the faces and the expressions and the personalities. There's something there that there is a whimsical sense, but there's a lot more depth, and I don't want the word whimsy to lose that, or undermine that value of the nuance and the depth of the pieces.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess like for those just to like get to know you, I mean, from maybe the start, what I would love to hear, and I think some of the audience, is just kind of how you first came into clay, and then maybe if you'll elaborate on kind of what your path has been and kind of how you
Okay.
got to where you are
Hmm.
today. So yeah, so what got you going?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be in the online show and also for the interview. I've been making stuff for a long time. I actually just turned 65, so I have a lot of history behind me. And really, I've made things from pretty early on. I remember in the very beginning, I would get the Foster White how-to books and how to draw, and you draw a cylinder for the body, and you draw a circle for the head, and you add things together, and before you know it, you have an elephant or you have some. So I remember being very interested in drawing when I was young, and my mom was very encouraging. We also grew up in the non-internet, non-phone era, so we had to make our own fun. And basically growing up in the 60s, we built mini bikes, built go-karts, did all kinds of fort stuff, and just did a lot of like building and doing stuff. And my parents were pretty forgiving and pretty generous about letting us trash the backyard and do stuff and kind of make a mess. And I always feel like that was a good thing. Probably not for them in every way, but I think it gave us the freedom to do things and try stuff. So, it was sort of that era of, doing things. And a lot of my friends would say, oh, would you draw this for me? Or would you, and so I go, well, wow, I must have a little more talent than they do because they want me to do it rather than them. And so then in high school, I actually got into art quite a bit, and we had a really great art teacher who gave us a lot of freedom as well. And so I was doing a lot of drawing and painting, and got some accolades for that too. I won some awards in our student shows, and I remember just one ceramic piece I did in high school. It was a copy from a National Geographic magazine cover, and it was just a head, a bust. And I remember I didn't know how to do it and didn't know how to really put things together. My teacher was mainly a painter, but we did have a kiln in the backyard.
Uh-huh.
So I built it with newspaper inside, and when we fired it, somebody knew that iron oxide would be a really good treatment. So I iron oxided the whole thing and fired it again, and I was pretty happy with it. I also remember made a shoe out of clay in high school, and I painted it with acrylic paint. It was a Converse. And for our senior show, I put it in my show, and I was kind of bowled over that a kid came in and goes, wow, why did he put his old shoe in here? And I thought, wow, I can fool somebody with trompe l'oeil, which I didn't even know the word at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I won best to show in high school, and I got first place. And I thought, wow, I might want to keep trying this and do it a little bit more. So right out of high school, I went to community college in our town, and that was the early 70s, and art programs were being funded a lot at the time, and it was like a lot of growth. And we had a great ceramic program and a great ceramic teacher. I remember he was a chemistry teacher turned ceramic teacher, and he thought, God, why didn't I do this earlier? He goes, this is so much fun. And but the chemistry obviously helped him with
Yeah.
glazes and so on. Um, So yeah, community college, did a little more ceramic work. My brother actually was very interested in ceramics as well. And we both took classes at the community college. He's 1 year younger than me, and we did everything together when we were young. And so when we were in community college, we got so into ceramics, we asked my dad if he would let us, if we got a kiln, if we could put it in the backyard. We were just really serious. We wanted to do this ceramic thing and got pretty good at making pots. And so my dad actually let us, he piped in a gas kiln for us on the back patio, and we bought a wheel. I actually bought a wheel. I think it was in '75, and I still have it. It's my Shimpo, and it still works. So I mean, that's a plug for Shimpo right there. I didn't use it constantly all this time, but it's still a really good kiln, or a good wheel. So anyway, we did that. Took pots, sold them at nurseries, tried to do crafts fairs in town and so on. And but really, painting and drawing has been my interest for from the very start. And ceramics was always kind of a fun thing to do. That's how I always saw ceramics, as this is kind of a fun, crafty thing to do. But I think I was a lot better at drawing and painting really when I started out, and that's what I really put a lot more energy into. And so in junior college, I took a lot of painting and drawing classes, and ceramics did that. It's kind of like trying to do it all, and enjoy that. Yeah, so I think that was '75 when I decided to continue with school at San Diego State. And San Diego isn't too far from, I guess I could backtrack a little bit and say that I was in Los Angeles at the time.
Okay.
I was born in New Jersey, and my parents moved us to Southern California in 1957. So that's where I grew up. And so all of the stuff that I'm talking about took place in a little town called Whittier, which is south of Los Angeles. And that's
how old were you when you guys moved?
I was 2.
Okay, so yeah, you're pretty much West Coast. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
I was gonna say you don't have much New Jersey.
No, I still have a lot of relatives. They don't have much of the accent, and so that's really fun to see my relatives and say, "Yeah, you look like me," and there's something that you have that I have. But really, my family just left, and they came to the West Coast and left everything behind. My mom and dad. But anyway, Southern California was a haven for skateboarding, for surfing, for outdoor activities. So I got into surfing in high school, got into playing guitar, which I still play quite a bit. And so to me, at the time, actually, art was just part of everything. It wasn't like, I'm just going to do art because that's all I want to do. Even though I leaned that way in school because I got some accolades for it, I was still very interested in surfing. I was still interested in a lot of things, really. So it seemed like it was in the culture at the time. In a way, it's like there was a lot of encouragement to do creative, unusual things. At least that's how it felt.
I think there's truth to that. That's yeah, absolutely.
Then from there, I went to San Diego.
Okay, and then that brought you into would that be your undergrad or grad in San Diego?
Undergrad.
Undergrad. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then what did you specifically focus on ceramics at that point, or was this painting, sculpture, everything?
Painting and printmaking.
And printmaking too. Okay.
Those were my 2 interests at the time, and they had a good ceramic program though, I remember, and they had so I was down there making pots, and I could always sell my pots. I realized I could put some characters on them, make some character cups, do some drawing on them, and it seemed like ceramics was always something that was pretty easy to sell. And I thought, well, crafts fairs, I thought, thinking that way, like that's my bread and butter thing, maybe. And then my painting and drawing, which maybe people didn't relate to as much, or I couldn't, then that would be my other thing. So just trying to keep those balls in the air that way. And, when you're an undergrad, you're doing all kinds of things anyway, you have to take all the different classes. So it became kind of that kind of thing. But San Diego is a great place to live, and I still have friends that down there. And one of my friends that I think showed with you for a while, Jeff Irwin, and he taught at Grossmont College in San Diego for a long time, and he's still a really good friend of mine. And there's, but anyway, San Diego was a great experience for just kind of getting a little more well versed at things. But I I think like a lot of people, I didn't know what I wanted to do in terms of what art I was going to follow and what I just wanted to keep making things and see where it went. And you get exposed to so many different things that it's really hard to, to nail one thing down. I think for a lot of people, a lot of my students are, I don't have a style. What am I supposed to do? And I go, well, don't worry about it. You'll keep working and things will evolve. That's kind of how it works for most people.
Yeah.
But one thing I remember, pardon me?
Oh, like finding your voice over time, I think. With
which
I
think for most people that's a lifelong, or for some people maybe not. But But one thing I remember that was a really big influence was there was in Laguna Beach there was this thing called the Sawdust Festival every year, and it was basically potters and craftspeople that came together and showed work at this sort of outdoor fair, and it was. I think I was in high school at the time, so I'm backtracking a little, but I think just that there's something clicked that made me think people can do that. They can actually do this sort of gypsy lifestyle and make a living, and there was something about that sort of alternative approach to things rather than the 9 to 5. And I also think that was in the culture at the time. It's like back to land movement and people just saying, why do we have to do it? Like people have done it forever. There's another way. So I think there was a little of that in me too. It's like, well, if I could do crafts fairs and travel around a little or work my own hours and, and do a few different things, that seems a lot more interesting to me than just this grind of some kind, so.
Yeah. That's
kind of how I looked at it.
So then from doing pots and printmaking and painting, how did that eventually shift for you into the sculptural type of work that you're doing? Or what? Well,
in 1978, after I graduated from San Diego State, my girlfriend, who's my wife now, we decided we wanted to get out of San Diego. We saw San Diego and LA becoming one big thing, and we both love nature, and we've done, used to backpack, and we just liked outdoors. So we thought, where can we go as far away as possible and still be in the States so my wife could finish her schooling? So we saw Humboldt State on the map, and I don't know if many of your viewers know where that is, but it's about 50 miles south of the Oregon border on the coast of California, and we're way up there behind the redwood curtain. And so we came up here, and my wife went to school, and I painted houses. I learned to paint houses quite a few years earlier. My brother and I had a business in the summer, and we would make money doing that. So when I moved up here, I got a job with a contractor and just worked and made some money while my wife went back to school. And then I saw that they had a master's program up here, and I thought I had done a lot of printmaking at San Diego, and I really was into it. So I went and visited their printmaking lab at Humboldt, and I was really impressed with the lab and the teacher's work. And I applied and got into their master's program in printmaking. So I did that, and that was a 2-year program. But meanwhile, I discovered the ceramic lab at Humboldt State. And I don't know if you know much about Humboldt State ceramics, but we have an amazing facility. And Louis Merrick, who founded he founded the lab here in 1969. He's an Alfred grad from way back, and very well known for his work. But he founded this program, and as soon as I came down here and saw the facility and saw the work that was being made, it's like, oh my God, I had no idea. So I was running down from printmaking to ceramics and then back up to printmaking. And my master's show was half clay and half print. So it was kind of and I really tried hard to make them look like they related somehow, like, with patterns and color. And I didn't want it to look like, here's this guy's ceramics and here are these prints, which don't, have much to do with each other. So that was it. That was great. And I got to know it's a small school. And so I met Jeff Irwin, who I mentioned. I met him here. And a lot of people, went on that I kept in touch with. A lot of really famous people went to school here too, Michael Lucero and John Roloff. And I mean, there's a really big list of people that have, gone on to do big things from here. So yeah, Humboldt was great for just sort of a place to develop further. And, in a master's program, you have a little more freedom to focus on what you want. So I started to develop my imagery, during that time, and not so much figurative work. My pots were more abstract, with like a lot loose and gestural with a lot of pattern on them and stuff, but not really figurative at the time. My prints had some figures in them, but.
Okay.
So yeah, that was that was a really interesting time. And that was like 1982, I think, to 84 that I was at Humboldt.
Okay.
And then I decided if I ever want to teach, I really need an MFA because they only had an MA here. And it was like a weird thing.
Okay.
A lot of schools don't have MAs at all anymore, but at the time it was like, it wasn't funded, and it was like, it was like everybody here was wondering if, it was just, some of our areas had an MA and some didn't. And it was, so I applied to 3 different schools, I think, or 4, and I got in UC Santa Barbara, and I knew the printmaker there. I didn't know the ceramic person there. I really didn't.
Okay.
But when I got there, they said, you can work in any studio you want. You can do prints. You can do, and I was a print tech at the time. I worked in the print lab and got paid to be a tech.
Mm-hmm.
So I did prints. And then my graduate show, as my MFA show, was prints and ceramics and collage. It was kind of a combination. And that was my first experience with people walking in with their checkbook open saying, I'll buy it, I'll buy it, I'll buy it. And that's Santa Barbara. I had no idea, because Humboldt County, everybody loves art, but nobody has money.
True, but there's not like all the money. Yeah.
But down there, I mean, people were like coming in and saying,
I'll take it.
So it was encouraging that way. And at that
point, was the ceramics at all figurative at that point, or no? Not even. Okay.
It was very abstract, and it was very soft slab, just like I'm working now. It was rolling out thin slabs of clay and using newspaper or other armatures and building forms out of slabs. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of the folds and the looseness of the clay. But it was, a lot of it I painted with acrylic paint. I do some low fire glazing on them, and then I'd paint with acrylic. And they were pretty loose and abstract. But some of my ceramics was figurative. They were starting to be figurative piece. I did this one piece called Procession, which had like 6 figures pulling carts, and it was about 6 feet long, and all the pieces were tied together with string, and they all had baggage on their carts. So that was definitely related to what I do now. And that piece was bought by a woman in Mount Montecito, and she traded me for a kiln. Delivered it to her house, and she goes, "You want to do a partial trade for a kiln?" It was electric, so I put the kiln in the truck, and that was my first kiln for after school. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So
so Santa Barbara, and then how did you, or where from there? How did you get back up north again?
My wife and I love Santa Barbara, as everybody probably does when they visit, but there's no way you can afford to live there. I mean, unless it's just one of those places that looks so nice. But if we moved out of a 3-bedroom house on 54 acres up here that we paid $350 a month for. That was back then. Mm-hmm. And then we paid the same amount for like a converted garage in Santa Barbara, to rent. And so we knew that we couldn't stay. But after grad school, we thought, where are we going to go? And we thought, why not just go back to Humboldt, and we'll just hunker down, and I'll apply for jobs, and we'll just use that as a home base because we know people up there and it's relatively cheap. And so we did that. And then there was a guy at the community college, and he offered me a class to teach. And I thought, great. And so I taught a class, and then this was, by now, my wife had actually come back with me, and she was working in the art department doing masking slides, and working when we had slides back in the day. She worked in the slide library. So she actually got a job as working in the office at school here right when we got back. And then she heard that they needed somebody to teach a drawing class, so I taught a drawing class, and that led to 2 drawing classes, and that led to a few more classes. And then I can't remember the details, but one of the 2 faculty that taught ceramics here was either on sabbatical or something. And so I filled in there, and it just sort of worked out.
Snowballed.
And then it turned into a tenure track job at one point where, where one of them retired, and there was going to be a replacement, and it was advertised, and I got it. So I've been teaching at Humboldt since 1987. So I've been teaching a long time here, but it started with drawing. and I taught drawing and ceramics for a long time together. And then, I needed to be down here more when the faculty retired, and, I run the program now. So obviously that's what I do. And I love teaching drawing, but it's like bouncing back and forth was just, it's like a totally different hat. You go up there with your clay clothes on and you have to it's a different world, But I've drawn for a long time, and I don't draw much anymore, but I still encourage all my students to draw and say, it's just such a good foundation thing for everything. If you can draw, it helps you to see stuff. And so that's kind of how that went. I mean, we moved back and we never left. I mean, we got back here, and I've been making ceramics and teaching ever since, and raising kids. We have 2 kids that are growing up and out of the house now, but I mean, it's just been all that juggling. But I try to keep my work. I've been making work, and when you're teaching, you have to show, and I've showed, and you have to kind of keep that ball rolling, and I have been. And I think my work's evolved to a point where it is recognizable, and people say, "Oh, I see that as your work." But I don't know if you had a chance to look at my website at all, but I do work in wood. I work in collage. I've done a lot of mixed media. So to me, it's, sometimes it's really important that I can move from one thing to something else for a while. It's also important if I show that I can put that together in a way that looks like it all belongs together and has one voice.
I was gonna say there's definitely a continuity between all those. I wouldn't call them bodies, but different mediums that you work in. And I think that's kind of neat. They definitely, looking at them, they inform each other, and you can tell there is that thread that brings them all together. I mean, looking at, at the ceramic work, and it was funny because you called out early on in your life, getting to play and build things. Because I see the ceramic work as assemblage, it's like you're creating components, you're putting together these things as if you found, components. Was there something was that like a light bulb going off kind of thing, or was that a slow evolution into thinking that? Because I've kind of heard it different as you've given me your story. I'm like, oh yeah, that's where Keith could have been that's where that came from maybe. But at what point did you kind of, I don't know how to say it, but maybe like segue into going, I'm going to make a wood peg leg, and this slab is going to be fabric, and this is, now it's a character, and so on and so forth.
Well, one thing, since we're talking about ceramics mostly, is for me, ceramics has always been, it's been really difficult. I mean, drawing was fairly easy for me, but clay, I was one of the last guys to figure out how to center on the wheel. And I went in thinking, oh, I'm going to be great at this because I can draw and I can paint. But no, it's totally different. It's a mechanical, weird thing. And it took me a long time to learn how to center. And then also when I wanted to hand build, I was trying to figure out, like, how can I make my figures? And I don't think I was ever really shown how to, make a piece solid and hollow it out. And I never really thought about that. I had used newspaper for armatures before and had done that. But I realized if you make clay leather hard and you use pieces at that stage, you can stack them and make big things pretty quickly with components. So to me, that kind of clicked. And I think it was in grad school, I made pieces that were like leather hard pieces, and I'd score and slip them together. And then I could make things look stiff, and I could cantilever things out, and I could think in a different way with gravity. I know that a lot of people are great at like coil building figures, and a lot of people do it so many, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. But for me, I had a hard time with waiting. Like, I didn't want to wait and build a piece this far up and then say, okay, now I'm going to let that set up to get to the next. I like to think my work has a gestural feel to it, kind of a looseness. And to me, gesture, my favorite kind of drawing and art to look at really is gesture work. I love looking at clay that's, I love looking at Volcus work, and I love looking at people that, Akio Takamori, I love looking at his line work. I mean, to me, that is like, it looks fluid, it looks loose, it doesn't look tentative, it looks confident. So to me, that's the kind of work I've always been interested in. It's not necessarily what my work is, because it does have that tight look too, but I wanted the slabs at least, and the way they're built, to look kind of a little easy and loose somehow. So yeah.
Well,
I think it did come from that sort of way of building.
Yeah. No, it's great to hear that. I think that component thing and how that can translate into sort of the assemblage look, or some look of assembly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, you call your work out as as tight, but that, you know, where I was trying to, and I was having a hard time articulating it earlier. I think you have this really tight execution, obviously, but it's those nuanced moments of the subtleties of like a fold or a dip or a drape or a
Mm-hmm.
slouch, or the subtle expressions that, that I think still really come through. Cause you know, I see some art where someone's, you know, has a real high, you know, technical prowess like you do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they're tight, but then the whole thing is kind of tight and restricted. But
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things I really love about your work, is that it balances that sort of tightness and that technical execution
Mm-hmm.
with a nuanced sense of expression, like to your words, even like not alluded to, referring to like an accio, like a brushwork moment that, to me, as a viewer of your work, that exists in the gestures of the figures. That's, I think, really special about
Mm-hmm.
the characters you're making.
I
Um,
really appreciate that, because that is kind of what I'm aiming for. I'm kind of aiming for a little bit of the wow factor for people that do clay, like, wow, how did they do that? But I do
yeah,
want them to have, that a little, that looser, you know, like, not, I mean, you know, super tight work is, it just looks, you know, it looks like there's too much restraint or something. And I
yeah,
admire it, but I don't necessarily get drawn to that kind of work as much as, you know, other work that has
yeah.
that other feel to it. You know?
Yeah, sometimes for me it's like so much restraint that it lacks personality. Maybe it's like they're not letting themselves shine through. It's so tight that
Yeah.
you don't you're not getting your
Mm-hmm.
sense out there. Um,
I think
thinking
that
this,
comes sometimes. I think that comes sometimes with students that, like with my students, a lot of times they're tight because they're not comfortable yet with the material, you know. And
yeah,
then once they get more comfortable and they understand the timing, their work gets looser. And you look at a lot of famous people, and they start off kind of tight, and then, you know, their last work is pretty loose and freer looking. So
agreed. Yeah, I see that in pots a lot too. It's like at
yeah,
first or I like when I see that in the evolution of a potter too, where they're tight for a while and then they find how to
mm,
find that wabi sabi, that looseness over time, and get more
yeah.
expressive, and it's more confidence in
Mm-hmm.
loosening up. Um, so are you using, is all your like forms and surfaces, are you using molds? Are you sculpting just for
Mm-hmm.
general kind of process? I know you mentioned you're doing some slabs. Sounds like you're
Yeah.
not doing coils. How are you built? Just kind of brief. You don't have to go into super detail, but
No, I'd be
um,
glad to. And I guess right now I'll plug that I do have an article in Ceramic Monthly in October, and
that's,
it's a how-to. They asked me if I would show how I do my surfaces. So
oh,
I don't know
rad.
how perfectly illustrated it is. I just photograph things at stages, and I think it gets the idea across. But anyway, for people that want to see it, it'll be in October. But
Awesome.
but basically, like I was mentioning earlier, I think for me the hardest thing with making anything is, how do you get the form up? You know, like, how are you going to build a form? Because I can always do the detail stuff. I mean, to me, that comes easier than getting a form to be what I want it to be. And so I started off, like I said, using leather hard slabs and sometimes coil and other things. But lately, I've just been throwing parts. So I'll throw a body part, I'll throw
Okay.
a head, I'll throw the wheels, I'll throw some other components that I might want to cut up later. And then when they're leather hard, I'll assemble them. And so then I basically just have an armature that's the size that I want my piece to be. And it has the idea, like the head might be tilted a certain way, and, you know, the body might have a certain shape. If I'm doing one of my rabbit figures, I reach inside the form while it's still wet and push for the leg parts, you know, push it out from the inside before
Yeah.
it dries too much. And then when it's leather hard, I roll out thin slabs, and it's usually over some kind of texture, either textured fabric or plaster molds that I make that have texture on them.
Okay.
Sometimes, you know, I'll have a piece of wood that I found that has cool texture if I want that, and I'll just roll clay direct. The positive and negative don't always matter. You know, for
Yeah.
some things, it doesn't look that different. You know, like with a fabric texture, I don't need to make a mold of that because the positive and negative look about the same.
Sure. Sure.
I mean, it works for what I want, in other words.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, then I attach the slabs when they're wet and soft, because they gotta be malleable and, you know,
Yep.
be able to
Yep.
folds. And then once they're all on, I'll add details. So whatever details I want to add, if I want to add stitching, if I want to add buttons, if I want to have wood components, you know, I'll score and slip those on, or you know, attach them. And really, you know, the details oftentimes are added with color. Like a lot of times the color will be just rubbed off in places to make it look worn away. Sometimes I'll use glazes that are more matte or satin to look like older material.
Yeah.
Sometimes just one coat of glaze on something will give it that sort of fluxy look like Gersley borate, but not
Yeah. Yeah.
too shiny. But it's just been a learning curve but what I realize is, I mean, I don't think we talked about this yet, but I did decide a long time ago that I was a high fire person for quite a while in the very beginning. I mean, I worked for a company and I made 12.5 pound production bowls for a long time. They
Yeah.
slip cast everything else, but they wanted, the bowls they couldn't slip cast. But I realized a long time ago that the look of high fire, I admire it. I love it. I love when people make it look good. And I still look at a Celadon glaze and drool and, look at
Yeah.
people's work. But I knew that I wasn't going to do that for what I'm doing a while back. And I feel like with the staining and the underglazes, it works for the kind of look I'm after. And the clay that I use is pretty strong, fired at 03. It's got grog in it. And it's actually, it's strong enough for what, I don't worry about these pieces getting tinged and broken. They're, they will, obviously, if you, hit them too hard, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, you've already been so generous with your time, but it led me to another question. We're talking about the form that your pieces have taken. Conceptually, like, what do you, what's the, I don't know, I guess I would loosely call them toys or like a stuffed animal. Like, I'm assuming there's, some narrative there that has some meaning for you. Having done so many of these, like, where does that all lie in your sort of vernacular or kind of what you're talking about?
I think that's always, when my students and I talk about writing an artist statement, I go, you should have a little bit of technical and you should a little bit about what are you saying, but I think it's always been hard for me to know exactly how to talk about my work. My artist statement that I gave you has been revised a few times. And I think it kind of gets the idea across that really, like, if I find something on the street or in a thrift store that has this quality of being used and worn, or an old suitcase, like, it's like it already has a story. I mean, you don't have to like say what it's about, because it says something inherently, just by like who wore that off and who handled it, and was it run over by a car, or was it, so it's kind of been through some steps in life. And I feel like my work is, I try to create that these figures have had some, they've been around, they've existed, they're worn out in places, they might have a gestural quality that sort of, they're tired, or they're sort of sassy, or whatever you want to call it. They just have an attitude sometimes. And a lot of times I don't know what that attitude is or what the facial expression is going to be. I fold the clay and it might just create this sort of expression. And if I don't handle it too much and just put it on, it's like it's there. I don't have to work too hard for that.
Yeah.
It's like it just kind of gets it. So, and then a lot of times it's hit and miss. I mean, a lot of my characters I don't want to show really, or I don't, because I feel like they don't quite have that thing. But there's a lot of artists I look at. I mean, I've looked at, I love the, Jean Dubuffet, I love the, there's a lot of people whose work that I just look at, and, folk artists, I love looking at folk art. I love looking at stuff that's made. I can make things very representational. The first few heads I did that I mentioned, like the one off of National Geographic, and I mean, I got really accurate, and I think I could be really good at that if I wanted to. I think I could be really good at making like accurate representations of figures, but everybody does that, and everybody has done that. And it's like, I always look at people, for me, that can tweak them a little, and sort of give it some personality without having to. So if I can just rip a hole for an eye, and if it gets the idea of an eye or a look, rather than actually drawing the eye or sculpting the eye, to me, that's just as good. Or maybe it's just, for me, for the look that I'm after, it works fine. I realized a long time ago doing representational drawing that it's a bit of a slippery slope. I mean, I think it's good. It's a good skill to learn, but it's like, where are you going to go from there with it? And a lot of people go a lot of amazing places with it. I'm not saying you can't, by juxtaposing things together. But anyway.
But kind of to our earlier comments, it's like, when you get too tight, you restrict that there's that element of expression that you keep, you're touching on, I think, with those moments of ripping something to get it, or when the slab lays just right and it begins the expression that if you maybe set out to make it that way, there'd be a sterility, it'd be sterile. It wouldn't have that richness that you get
Yeah,
from
exactly. Exactly.
it just happening more fluidly like it does
Exactly.
for you. That's awesome.
I always
Well,
appreciate I always appreciate hearing people tell me what my work's about, because a lot of times they nail it way more than I would, and you know,
yeah,
they'll interpret it a certain way, and um, you know, as long as they'll stop and look at it, you know. And I think when we have critiques in class, I always go, people aren't stopping at your work. You got to do something about that, you know. Like, what can you do to
yeah,
draw people in and get them to stop for however long, you know? But
yeah.
um, did I give you enough info here, or did I give you too much
You've
info?
done,
Or
no, you've done great. My goodness, no, you've been so generous. I really appreciate it.
okay.
For everyone that's listened, Keith alluded to a couple of things. We do have his artist statement up on the website, along with a great body of work that we're showing at www.eutecticgallery.com. And I'm excited I'll keep an eye out for the Ceramics Monthly article. I'm excited to see how you documented that and how they show that. And yeah, I look forward to continuing to work with you, and hopefully, we kind of talked about this before the call, but just kind of touch and base and continue to talk about life and what you're working on. So,
Yeah.
thank you again.
Thank you,
And
Brett, so much, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
awesome, man. Well,
Okay.
have a great
Bye. See you
rest of
later.
your day. Catch you
All
later.
right. You too. Bye bye.